Before we get into tonight's story, drop your city in the comments right now. Doesn't matter where you're watching from. Dallas, Detroit, London, Manila. Just let us know you're here. And if you haven't subscribed to Crimson Secrets yet, hit that button. We post new stories every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Now, let's talk about a woman named Sloane Merritt. And let's talk about the night she walked into a room full of people who had already decided she didn't belong there, and chose, deliberately, and with full awareness of what she was doing, to stay. The invitation had come on a Tuesday. Not emailed, not texted. Printed on heavyweight cream cardstock with the Whitfield Group crest pressed into the upper corner in blind embossing, the kind of detail that cost more than most people's grocery bills. Sloane had found it propped against her keyboard when she returned from a morning deposition, and she'd stood there in her heels for a long moment, reading it twice before she set it down and went to get coffee. The Whitfield Group annual recognition dinner, black tie, the Alderton Hotel. 7 o'clock. Her name was on it. Sloane Merritt, printed in the same font as everyone else's, as if she were simply a guest like the others. She wasn't. Sloane was 44 years old and had spent the last 11 of those years as the silent partner behind Whitfield Group's risk management division. The woman who had restructured their liability exposure, the one who had quietly untangled 3 separate whistleblower situations before they became front-page problems. She had done this from the outside, technically. She was not an employee. Her name appeared on no org chart. That had been the arrangement, and for a long time it had suited her just fine. What she hadn't accounted for was her husband. His name was Trent Hollowell. He was handsome in the particular way that men who've never been told no tend to be: easy smile, broad shoulders, a laugh that filled a room and made everyone feel like they were in on something. He was a senior VP at Whitfield, and he was very good at his job, which mostly involved making other people feel like he was essential to the work they had already done. Sloane had known this about him for a while. She had told herself for longer than she should have that knowing it was enough, she had been wrong. The thing about living with a man who underestimates you is that you have 2 choices. You can correct him constantly, patiently, at the cost of your own exhaustion. Or you can let him go on believing what he believes, and you can watch, and you can learn things about him that you would never have learned any other way. Sloane had chosen the second option about 3 years into their marriage, when she overheard Trent on the phone with his brother, describing her as a consultant type. You know, she does her thing, it's fine. She makes decent money. She'd been standing in their kitchen at the time, making risotto from scratch because it was his favorite, and they were having people over the next day. She'd stood there stirring the pot and listening and had felt something shift very quietly inside her chest. Not break, just shift. She'd kept stirring. The woman's name was Petra. No, not from name was Petra. No, not from that list. Start over. The woman's name was Lane Bowden. She was 31, which Sloane knew because she'd found a birthday card tucked into the inner pocket of Trent's garment bag while she was dropping off his dry cleaning. Not a card that said happy birthday from the whole office. A card that said I keep thinking about last Thursday. L handwritten. Purple ink. The kind of pen someone uses when they want you to feel something when you hold the paper. Sloane had put the card back exactly where she found it. She had gone home and poured herself a glass of wine and sat by the window and watched the lights come on across the city, and she had thought, very carefully, about what she wanted to do next. She had not cried. That surprised her a little, even then. She'd thought she would cry. Instead, she'd felt something clarify, the way a solution clarifies, finally settles. Not clean exactly, but clear. Transparent. She could see straight through to the bottom. She had called her attorney the next morning. Not a divorce attorney. Her corporate attorney. A woman named Frances Choi, who had been handling Sloane's business arrangements for 8 years, and who, upon hearing what Sloane was proposing, had been silent for about 4 seconds and then said, "Yes, to do all of this before the dinner. Yes." "That's aggressive." "I know." Another pause. "I'll need about 6 weeks." "You have 5. The Alderton Hotel was the kind of place that made you feel underdressed the moment you stepped into the lobby, even if you were wearing exactly the right thing. Sloane wore navy, that made her look less like she was trying than she was. She'd considered red and dismissed it. She didn't need to announce herself. She was already there. The dinner was held in the grand ballroom on the second floor. By the time Sloane arrived, the cocktail hour was in full swing, and the room held about 200 people, arranged in the particular formations that always emerge at events like this. Clusters of colleagues who work together, but wouldn't choose each other. A handful of spouses who've learned how to look engaged, and then the younger contingent near the bar, drinking fast and networking hard. She found Trent near the windows. He was talking to a group of people she recognized, a few board members. The head of acquisitions, someone from the Chicago office, and he was doing the thing he did, leaning slightly forward, one hand in his jacket pocket, delivering something that was making everyone laugh. He was good at it. She had always known he was good at it. Lane Bowden was standing 2 feet to his left. Sloane had seen photographs. Obviously. She'd done what anyone does when they find a purple ink birthday card. She'd spent about 40 minutes with a phone and a name and a company LinkedIn page. Lane was younger than Sloane had expected her to feel. That wasn't the right way to put it. What she meant was, Lane was the kind of young that comes with certainty, with the absolute conviction that the room you're standing in is the room you've earned. She had that posture, that tilt of the chin. She was wearing gold. Trent spotted Sloane across the room, and something moved behind his eyes. Too fast for anyone else to catch, but Sloane had been reading that face for 14 years. He recovered in under a second, smiled, lifted his drink slightly. She smiled back and went to find the bar. She asked for sparkling water. The bartender, young, efficient, slightly overwhelmed, handed it over with a lemon wedge she hadn't asked for, and she thanked him anyway and turned back to face the room. There was a woman beside her almost immediately. 60-something, white hair cut close, wearing a bracelet that could have paid a semester of tuition. Her name was Cordelia Whitfield. She was the founder's widow and still sat on the board, and she had been watching Sloane from the moment Sloane walked in. "You look entirely too calm for someone standing alone at a Whitfield dinner," Cordelia said. She said it without cruelty, almost with admiration. "I've been to a lot of dinners," Sloane said. Cordelia considered this. "You're the merit from the risk restructuring, the one we never actually see. That's accurate. Trent's wife, also accurate." Cordelia looked across the room to where Trent was now guiding Lane toward a different cluster of guests, hand briefly at the small of her back. "The kind of touch that looks like nothing if you're not looking." She said. Sloane took a sip of her water. "The food here is quite good," Cordelia said after a moment. "The salmon in particular. I'll keep that in mind." "I'll keep that in mind?" Cordelia nodded, once slowly, and moved away toward a group of board members, and Sloane watched her go, and felt for the first time that evening something that was almost like hope. Dinner was served at 8. Sloane was seated at table 11, which was far enough from the main table to be a statement and close enough to not be an insult. Or perhaps it was both. Trent was at table 3, near the front, with the senior leadership. Sloane had known this in advance. She had looked up the seating chart. Her table companions were pleasant. A woman from the legal department, who spent most of dinner telling a story about a vacation to Portugal that kept escalating in complications, A man from finance who seemed relieved that no one was asking him to perform, and a couple who turned out to be the caterer's clients and had ended up at this table entirely about it, and were being extremely gracious about it. Sloane liked them immediately. She was halfway through the salmon. Cordelia had been right when the speeches began. The CEO went first, then the head of the board. Then there was a video montage set to music that was a little too cinematic for the occasion. And then Trent stood up. He hadn't been announced as a speaker. That was the first thing Sloane noticed. He'd simply stood up, and the CEO had nodded and gestured toward the microphone. And Trent had walked up there with the ease of a man who has rehearsed this moment, without letting himself know he was rehearsing it. He spoke for about 7 minutes. He talked about the Whitfield Group's growth over the past decade. He talked about leadership and loyalty and the kind of institutional memory that keeps a company honest. He talked about the future the merger that was coming, the acquisition they'd been working toward for 18 months, the new chapter that Whitfield was about to begin. And then, almost offhand, the way you might mention weather, he said something that made 2 or 3 people at table 11 go very still. He said, "Of course, for those of us who've been here building this, from the ground up, it means something different. We know what this company actually is. We know who actually did the work." He wasn't looking at Sloane. He was looking at Lane. The applause was light but polite. Trent returned to the CEO, said something that smoothed the moment over. The music changed. Sloane set down her fork. The woman from the legal department had stopped mid-story about Portugal. She looked at Sloane with the particular expression of someone trying to decide whether to say something. Sloane gave her a small, steady smile, the kind that says, "I'm fine, and also please don't," and the woman nodded and picked up her wine. Sloane picked up her sparkling water. She stayed. After dinner, the room reorganized itself into the shipsy second half of an event that everyone is technically still attending, but has emotionally already left. The waitstaff moved quietly between tables collecting glasses. The DJ, such as he was, had begun playing something low and inoffensive. Small groups gathered and dispersed. Sloane was standing near the windows, the same windows where she'd first spotted Trent when Lane approached her. She hadn't expected this. She thought Lane would avoid her, or that Trent would manage the evening well enough that the two of them never had to speak. She'd underestimated Lane's particular brand of confidence. "Sloane," Lane said, just the name, no preamble. "Lane," Sloane replied, same way. No warmth, no hostility. Just acknowledgement. Lane looked at her for a moment. She was trying to read something in Sloane's face, trying to find the hurt, the anger, the something that would tell her what kind of scene this was about to be. Sloane gave her nothing to read. "You've known," Lane said finally. "For a while, yes." Lane seemed to recalibrate. Tears. A confrontation. A scene that could be walked away from. This wasn't it. "And you just stayed. I had things to do first," Sloane said. A small silence, the kind that has weight. "What does that mean?" Lane asked. Sloane looked past her, across the room to where Trent was deep conversation with 2 board members and the company's general counsel. He was animated, loose with the confidence of a man who thinks the night has gone well for him. "You'll know by Monday?" Sloane said. She set her glass down on the windowsill and went to say goodbye to Cordelia Whitfield. Here's what Sloane had done during those 5 weeks. She had engaged Francis Choi to complete a formal audit of every consulting contract she'd held with the Whitfield Group over the past 11 years. What that audit revealed, and what Francis had formalized into a 94-page document delivered to the board's independent directors on the Friday, before the dinner, was that Trent Hollowell had, on 7 separate occasions, represented Sloane's strategic work as his own in internal board communications. He had used her analysis, her models, her restructuring frameworks, and had presented them upward under his name, with her role either omitted or described as administrative support from an outside vendor. The board had not known that the outside vendor was his wife. They had not known, therefore, that when they had promoted Trent twice in 6 years, based on his demonstrated strategic capabilities, they had been promoting him based on capabilities that were not, in any meaningful sense, his. Francis had also filed the preliminary paperwork for what would become effective the following Monday, the formal dissolution of the quiet holding structure that had made Sloane's arrangement with Whitfield Group possible. Sloane was not dissolving it as a loss. She was converting it. Francis had negotiated with Cordelia Whitfield, who had called Sloane directly 2 days after receiving the audit, and the result was an offer. A formal seat on the board's risk committee, equity stake at fair market value for the 11 years of work, and a consulting agreement restructured under Sloane's own name. No more invisible labor, no more administrative vendor. The first vote on Trent's position was scheduled for Monday morning. Sloane had not asked for that. She had submitted the audit. What the board did with it was the board's decision. She drove home alone. The city moved past the windows in that particular way it does after midnight. Quieter than usual, lit up but emptied out, the whole skyline looking slightly like a set with the actors gone. She didn't play music. She sat with the quiet and felt the specific exhaustion of a night you've been preparing for a long time finally being over. Her phone showed 2 missed calls from Trent, both from the last 30 minutes of the event. She had seen them. She had let them go. She made tea when she got home, Earl Grey, loose leaf, the way she'd made it since her 20s. She stood at the kitchen counter while it steeped and looked around the apartment. Their apartment, technically, though the lease was in her name, had always been in her name, and she catalogued it the way you do when you're about to stop living somewhere. Not with grief exactly, more with a kind of clear-eyed inventory. She would keep the kitchen table at an estate sale in Savannah 7 years ago, and she would keep the books, obviously. She would figure it out. Trent called again at 12:43 a.m. This time she answered. "Where are you?" he asked. He sounded like a man who was trying to decide which version of this conversation and hadn't landed on one yet. "Home," she said. "I've been calling." "I know." Silence. "Then Sloane, what did you do?" She thought about how to answer that. She thought about 11 years of deposition prep and risk frameworks and 3 o'clock viewing documents while he slept. She thought about the birthday card in purple ink. She thought about she makes decent money. She thought about the risotto she'd made from scratch and the way she'd stood at the stove and kept stirring. "I did my work," she said. "I just did it under my own name this time." She heard him take a breath that wasn't quite steady. "The board called Pemberton tonight after dinner." "I know." "Sloane, you should get some sleep," she said. "Monday's going to be a long day." She hung up. She drank her tea. The city was very quiet. Outside the window, a late cab moved through the intersection below, its light yellow against the dark, and she watched it until it turned the corner and was gone, and she thought, there it is. That's the moment. Right there. Not the speech. Not the dinner. Not even the audit. Just this. A cab turning a corner at 1:45 in the morning, the tea warm in her hands, the apartment exactly the way she'd left it. She had built something real. It had taken 11 years and one very long dinner and a 94-page document, and a woman named Frances Choi, who charged too much per hour and was worth every cent. And now everyone knew it was hers. On Monday, the board voted. Trent Hollowell was placed on administrative leave pending a full review of his executive conduct. The general counsel would oversee the process. A statement to the senior staff was issued by end of day. Personnel matters were confidential. The company was committed to integrity in its leadership, and there would be no further comment at this time. Lane Bowden resigned that same afternoon. Frances heard from one of the junior attorneys that she'd handed in her badge and left without stopping to collect the things on her desk. Someone had mailed them to her later, a small box, the kind you use for personal items. Sloane was in a meeting with Cordelia Whitfield and 2 members of the risk committee when she got the text from Frances. She read it, set her phone face down, and turned her attention back to the materials spread on the table in front of her. "You were saying," she said, "that the committee typically meets quarterly." "Typically," Cordelia said. She was watching Sloane with that same expression from the bar, the one that looked like respect but was also, underneath it, curiosity, as if she were still trying to figure out how someone could have been that close to the center of something for that long without anyone seeing them clearly. "That can be changed," Sloane said. She picked up her pen. "Let's talk about the meeting structure." They talked for another 2 hours. Outside the conference room windows, the city went about its business indifferent and alive. The same city it had always been. Sloane wrote things down, asked questions, pushed back on 2 assumptions that nobody had pushed back on before. And when the meeting was over, she shook hands with each person in the room and walked out into the hallway. She stood there for a moment, alone. Down the hall, an assistant was on the phone, voice low, dealing with something. An elevator opened and closed. Somewhere a printer ran through a job. 11 years. Sloane straightened her jacket and walked toward the elevator. She had a lot of work to do.